If you grew up in the 1990s, you're not just nostalgic for a different time, you're psychologically wired differently than every generation before and after you. Neuroscientists have discovered something incredible about 90s kids that explains why you see the world the way you do. If people constantly misunderstand you, misinterpret your intentions, or misjudge your character, you're not the problem. Psychology reveals that being chronically misunderstood is actually a sign of psychological depth that most people can't comprehend. Let's talk about something that's been haunting you your entire life. No matter how clearly you communicate, people get you wrong. No matter how genuine your intentions, someone questions them. No matter how you present yourself, others see something different. And you've probably spent years wondering, what's wrong with me? Why can't people just understand who I am? Here's the truth that will change everything. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not confusing. You're complex. And complexity looks like confusion to simple minds. Research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology reveals something extraordinary. People who are frequently misunderstood tend to score higher on measures of psychological complexity, emotional depth, and cognitive sophistication. In other words, you're not being misunderstood because you're unclear, you're being misunderstood because you're operating on a level that requires more effort to comprehend. And most people aren't willing to put in that effort. Here quotes. What's really happening? Psychologists identify something called cognitive complexity, the ability to hold multiple, sometimes contradictory truths simultaneously. You can be introverted and enjoy public speaking. You can be kind and have strong boundaries. You can be confident and have insecurities. You contain multitudes. But most people think in binaries. They need you to be one thing or the other, because nuance makes them uncomfortable. When you refuse to fit into their simple categories, they don't expand their understanding, they decide you're confusing. Let me tell you about the psychological phenomenon called projection. Research shows that people don't see you as you are. They see you through the filter of their own experiences, biases, and limitations. When someone with limited emotional range encounters your emotional complexity, they misinterpret it. When someone who thinks in black and white meets your grayscale thinking, they're confused. When someone who performs their personality meets your authentic, evolving self, they think you're inconsistent. The misunderstanding isn't about you, it's about the limits of their perception. Studies from Stanford University show that highly complex individuals often experience what psychologists call the burden of being misunderstood. You say something nuanced, and people hear only part of it. You show vulnerability, and people think you're weak. You show strength, and people think you're cold. You're friendly, and people think you want something. You're reserved, and people think you're rude. No matter what you do, someone misinterprets it because they're not seeing you, they're seeing their projection of you. Here. Neuroscience research reveals that understanding complex people requires more cognitive resources. It's literally harder work for the brain. Most people operate on cognitive autopilot, using stereotypes and shortcuts to quickly categorize others. But you can't be quickly categorized. You require actual attention, actual thought, actual effort to understand. And most people aren't willing to invest that energy. So instead of admitting they don't understand you, they decide you're the problem. Let quotes talk about authenticity versus consistency. Research from the Journal of Personality shows that psychologically mature individuals change their behavior based on context, not because they're fake, but because they're adaptable. You're different at work than with close friends. You're different in the morning than in the evening. You're different when you're stressed than when you're relaxed. This is called psychological flexibility, and it's a sign of high emotional intelligence. But people who lack this flexibility see your adaptability and call it inconsistency. They think you're being fake when you're actually being contextually appropriate. Here quotes. Something that will validate everything you've experienced. Studies show that complex people are more likely to be misunderstood in their intentions. You do something kind, and people assume you have an agenda. You set a boundary, and people think you're being difficult. You share a complex opinion, and people accuse you of contradicting yourself. Why? Because they're judging you by their own standards. They can't imagine doing something without an agenda, so they assume you can't either. They can't hold nuanced opinions, so they think your nuance is confusion. Clinical psychologists have identified what they call the paradox of depth. The deeper you are as a person, the more layers, contradictions, and complexity you contain, the more frequently you'll be misunderstood by shallow observers. It's not a flaw in you, it's a limitation in them. A puddle can't comprehend the ocean, and when the puddle encounters the ocean, it doesn't think, wow, there's so much depth here I don't understand. It thinks this water is confusing and wrong. Let's address the pain of chronic misunderstanding. Research from the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology shows that being frequently misunderstood correlates with feelings of isolation, frustration, and exhaustion. You've probably spent enormous energy trying to explain yourself, over-communicating, providing context, attempting to prevent misunderstanding, And it's exhausting because no matter how much you explain, some people are determined to misunderstand you. Not because you're unclear, but because understanding you would require them to challenge their simple worldview. Here quotes, "What really separates you from others? Most people want to be understood so desperately that they'll simplify themselves, perform a consistent character, become predictable and easy to categorize. But you've refused to do that. You've stayed authentically complex, even though it means being misunderstood. That takes courage that most people don't have. It's easier to be simple and understood than complex and misunderstood. You've chosen the harder path, because staying true to your complexity matters more than being easily digestible to others." Research from Harvard shows that people who embrace their complexity rather than simplifying themselves for others report higher long-term life satisfaction and authenticity. Yes, you're misunderstood more often, but you're also more genuinely yourself. You're not performing a one-dimensional character for easy comprehension. You're living as your full multifaceted self, and if people can't keep up, that's their limitation, not yours. Let quote. Psychologists identify several categories. First, there are binary thinkers, who need everyone to fit into simple either-or categories. You break their brain because you're both and. Second, there are projectors, who see their own motivations in everyone else. They can't imagine someone different from them, so they misinterpret everything you do through their lens. Third, there are surface-level observers, who judge based on appearances and first impressions without investing in deeper understanding. And fourth, there are threatened critics, who misunderstand you because your complexity threatens their simple self-concept. Here's something profound: the people who truly matter will put in the effort to understand you. Research shows that deep relationships require what psychologists call accurate empathy, the ability to see someone as they actually are, not as you assume them to be. The people who love you, who value you, who respect you, they'll ask clarifying questions. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt. They'll say, "I don't understand, help me understand," instead of "you're confusing and wrong." The misunderstanding from others isn't a loss, it's a filter that helps you identify who's worthy of your time. Studies from the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology reveal that complex individuals often feel most understood by other complex individuals. You're not weird for being complex, you're just rare. And rare things are harder to understand for common observers. When you meet other complex people, suddenly you feel seen. Not because you've changed or simplified yourself, but because you've found someone operating at your level of depth. So if you're constantly misunderstood, stop trying to simplify yourself for people who wouldn't appreciate your complexity anyway. Stop over-explaining to people who aren't listening. Stop shrinking your depth to fit their shallow understanding. You're not confusing, you're complex. You're not inconsistent, you're contextually adaptive. You're not hard to understand, you're just hard to understand for people who aren't willing to try. And that's not your problem to fix, that's their limitation to live with. Comment "Mi's understood" if you've spent your whole life feeling like no one truly gets you. Let's find our tribe of complex souls.